The baby left at the mansion. Until the heir returned. Have you ever imagined raising your own child every single day, without anyone knowing he was yours? What if the little boy everyone called abandoned had actually spent his whole life surrounded by his real family? Stay with me, because this story proves that the truth may sleep for years, but one day, it always wakes up. The Ocon family was the wealthiest family in the city. They owned businesses, luxurious homes, and were respected wherever they went. But despite all their wealth, they had only one child, a son named Daniel. Daniel was intelligent, kind, and ambitious. After finishing university, he received an opportunity to continue his studies overseas. Before leaving, he fell deeply in love with a young woman named Grace. Grace came from a poor family. She worked hard to support her widowed mother and younger siblings. Although their backgrounds were completely different, Daniel loved her for her honesty and kindness. The two dreamed about building a future together. "I'll come back for you," Daniel promised as they stood beneath a flowering tree the evening before his flight. Grace smiled through her tears. "I'll be waiting." Neither of them knew those simple words would take almost 20 years to come true. A few weeks after Daniel left, Grace began feeling sick. She visited a small clinic. The nurse smiled gently after the examination. "Congratulations," she said. "You're going to be a mother." Grace felt the room spin. She tried everything to contact Daniel. She called every number she had. She wrote letters. She even visited Daniel's parents' mansion, hoping someone could help her reach him. But Daniel had changed schools overseas, and communication became impossible. Months passed. Her pregnancy became impossible to hide. People whispered. Some neighbors mocked her. Others judged her without knowing her story. Grace refused to reveal Daniel's name. She didn't want anyone thinking he had abandoned her. She believed he simply didn't know. When her son was born, she loved him with all her heart. But love alone could not buy milk. It could not pay hospital bills. It could not keep a roof over their heads. One rainy night, after crying for hours, Grace made the hardest decision of her life. She wrapped her newborn son in the warmest blanket she owned. She kissed his tiny forehead again and again. Then she quietly walked toward the grand gates of the Ocon mansion. With trembling hands, she placed him where he would easily be found. She hid behind a nearby tree, tears streaming down her face. Moments later, the mansion's security guard heard the baby's cries. The entire household rushed outside. Mrs. Ocon carefully lifted the child into her arms. "Oh, this poor little boy. There isn't even a note." Mr. Ocon looked at the tiny baby. "Perhaps God has brought him to us." Instead of calling an orphanage, they chose to raise him themselves. They named him Ethan. Grace watched from a distance as the mansion gates slowly closed. She whispered through her tears, "Please forgive me, my son." Days later, Grace desperately searched for work. By what seemed like fate, the Ocon family needed a live-in maid to help care for their newly adopted baby. Grace could hardly believe it. She accepted the job immediately. No one recognized her. No one imagined the quiet young maid standing before them was Ethan's biological mother. From that day on, Grace raised her own son, while pretending he wasn't hers. Every morning she dressed him. Every afternoon she fed him. Every night, she sang him to sleep. But she could never call herself mother. Whenever Ethan smiled at her, her heart filled with joy and pain. As Ethan grew older, something unusual happened. Whenever he was frightened, he ran to Grace instead of anyone else. Whenever he was sick, he only wanted Grace beside him. If he had a bad dream, he searched for Grace's comforting voice. Mrs. Ocon often laughed. "Ethan loves you more than anyone." Grace would simply smile. Only she knew why. Every birthday, after the celebrations ended, Grace secretly kept one small memory. His first baby shoes. A broken toy car. A school drawing. Tiny treasures no one else noticed. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she held those memories close and quietly cried. Years passed. Ethan became a respectful, intelligent young man. The Ocons loved him as if he had been born into their family. Grace never stopped fearing one thing. What if the truth comes out? What if I lose him forever? So she remained silent. Meanwhile, Daniel continued building his career overseas. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. Then almost 20 years passed. Finally, Daniel decided it was time to return home for good. The entire mansion prepared for his arrival. Servants cleaned every room. Mrs. Ocone couldn't stop smiling. My son is finally coming home. Grace's heart pounded. She had imagined this day thousands of times. Would he remember her? Would he recognize her? Or had time erased everything? The black car slowly entered the mansion. Daniel stepped out. Older. More confident. But carrying the same warm smile Grace remembered. As he walked through the house greeting everyone, his eyes suddenly met Grace's. Time seemed to stop. Neither of them spoke. Daniel stared in disbelief. Grace. She lowered her eyes. Welcome home, sir. Her voice was calm, but inside she was shaking. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about Grace. The next morning he met Ethan. The young man greeted him politely. Welcome home. Daniel smiled, but something felt strangely familiar. Ethan laughed exactly the way Daniel laughed. He tilted his head the same way. Then Daniel noticed a small birthmark near Ethan's shoulder. His own grandfather had carried the exact same family mark. A question began growing inside him. It refused to disappear. A few days later, Daniel quietly asked Grace to meet him in the garden. When they were alone, he looked directly into her eyes. Grace, tell me the truth. Were you pregnant when I left? Grace froze. Years of silence suddenly became too heavy to carry. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She nodded. Then everything came pouring out. She told him about the pregnancy, the unanswered calls, the letters that never reached him, the loneliness, the shame, the poverty, and finally, the heartbreaking night she left their baby at the mansion gate, so he could survive. Daniel stood completely still. His eyes filled with tears. You mean Ethan is my son? Grace nodded again. I never wanted to hide him from you. I simply didn't know how to find you. Daniel covered his face. Nearly 20 years. 20 years he had unknowingly lived without his child. Not because he didn't love him, but because fear and silence had stolen that chance. The family agreed to take a DNA test. Days later, the results arrived. The truth could no longer be denied. Ethan was Daniel's biological son. And the little boy everyone believed had been abandoned had actually spent his whole life surrounded by his real family. The Ocone family was speechless. Mrs. Ocone looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. You've been raising your own child all these years. Grace quietly nodded. Instead of anger, Mrs. Ocone embraced her tightly. You should never have carried this burden alone. Mr. Ocone smiled through his tears. Our adopted son was our grandson all along. When Ethan finally learned the truth, he couldn't speak for several moments. He slowly turned toward Grace. The woman who tucked me into bed every night. The woman who protected me. You've been my mother all along? Grace nodded, unable to speak. Without another word, Ethan wrapped his arms around her. For the first time in nearly 20 years, she heard the words she had dreamed about every single night. Mom. There wasn't a dry eye in the mansion. The family that had unknowingly been separated for years was finally whole again. Sometimes fear hides the truth. Sometimes, silence lasts far longer than anyone expects. But genuine love has a way of finding its way back home. Because no matter how much time passes, the truth never stops waiting for the right moment to be told. Moral of the story: fear can silence the truth for years, but it can never erase it. Honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Sometimes, the family we spend years searching for has been beside us all along, waiting for the courage to let the truth be known. If this story inspires you, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share for more interesting story.